Hi, I'm Thomas Reed, host and producer of the Read My Mind radio podcast, and you are listening to the audio Description Narrators of America Know Your Narrator series, Beyond Your Narrator episode.
Welcome to the ADNA, the Audio Description Network Alliance, Know Your Narrator bonus episode. And this is kind of unique because it's not only a bonus episode, it's also a regular Know Your Narrator because we have Mhairi Morrison with us. She is an actor, a voiceover actor, and a writer of audio description, and also a narrator of audio description. Thanks so much for joining us, Mhairi.
Hi, Roy. Thank you so much for having me. And that is an amazing introduction. Thank you. I didn't realize how many hyphenates I had.
Isn't it funny? You kind of get stuck in like, oh, I'm doing this, and I've got this to do. And then all of a sudden your entire experience is just laid out in like this little bullet point of like, oh, wow, very cool.
Yeah. I am a mime artist as well, but that's probably totally irrelevant considering we're in microphones and talking about narration. That's the other end of it.
We have to talk about mime too, because I'm sure there's got to be some some intersections there between the skills that you have as a mime and also what you bring vocally. I'd love to explore that. That would be so much fun.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Let's see where it goes. But let's start by asking you what you love about audio description.
That is such a great question. Thank you. I've been thinking about this for a while. And today when I was thinking about it, I was thinking what I love about audio description is that it exists, that it is actually here. Really, when I think about the amazing way that it organically developed, and I think now where we're at in terms of it being so accessible on things like Netflix, and just the other day a company contacted me about audio describing a commercial, and I think to have this level of engagement and interest is amazing. I think it's really grown, and that's what's really exciting. I think there are so many things that I love about it. That is the key one, though, obviously, that it is in existence. Another thing that I feel very humbled and grateful for being able to do is to be able to be a part of a service which I really believe in. Because when I was in Los Angeles, I set up a focus group situation that we went into Junior Blind America. And I was privileged enough to be there while we were screening an episode of a show called Everybody Loves Raymond, which is a sitcom, for those who maybe don't know it. And oftentimes with sitcoms, there can be visual gags, physical comedy that can obviously just be lost if you can't see that. And so it was really amazing to be sitting in an audience and have people around me, visually impaired people, laugh at a visual gag that had been described. And so that moment has never left me in terms of always remember what you're doing this for, why you're doing this, and who is going to be able to enjoy a piece of medium that they wouldn't have been able to get otherwise.
What a great anchor to have that visual gags not being lost. That seems to reflect what you said earlier about the fact that audio description exists, but that is connection to the audience. And I'm curious how you've taken your efforts, both with that focus group and with your own efforts as a performer in multiple areas, and brought that to audio description. Specifically, when you think about audio description and how it's grown, how do you feel like you've helped enhance it beyond something like this focus group?
That's very generous of you to say. I'll tell you what, I started doing audio description a long time ago in 2005 in London, in the UK, where they'd already had quite a bit when I started. There was already about 20% of television was audio described, and quite a lot of cinema releases. Yeah. So it was something that was quite known here, even also in theatre. I did a lot of plays that had a live audio describer, for example. But when I moved to Los Angeles in 2009, nobody knew about it. It took me about 7 months to even connect with an audio describer in Los Angeles. And that was via New Jersey. Somebody in New Jersey put me in touch with somebody in LA, Deborah Lewis, who's a wonderful describer. And she had just been doing a lot of theater at that point. And so she and I connected, and we've since gone on and worked a lot together. But at that point, at least in my experience in Los Angeles, not many people knew what it was. And then fortunately, with Obama bringing in a requirement for a certain number of television shows to include audio description, that started to grow. But I found initially for really a couple of years, I was having a lot of conversations just explaining to people what it is. And strangely, the number one thing that people said after I had gone through sort of a lengthy explanation was, oh yeah, okay, so it's just like closed captioning. So I ended up saying, actually, no, you know what? It's the opposite of closed captioning. So it's not for the hard of hearing, because I thought somehow people are equating it to that. So I think if I've been at all a part of something shifting, hopefully it's just telling people about it and it becoming more of a known entity effectively.
Yeah, and that sounds so wonderful the way you've shared that misunderstanding of access for deaf people versus access for blind people. It's like, oh, it's the same thing. It's got to be.
Yeah,
It's like,
yeah,
yeah, it's a little. So that
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
nuanced conversation for someone who's so new to it.
yeah.
How do you navigate that with, let's say, someone who's sighted, who's first hearing about audio? I mean, is that okay? Can I put you on the spot, like how a conversation might have gone with you?
Well, yeah, I mean, there are kind of stock sentences that, well, listen, I even had to say this the other night when this person had contacted me saying, I've got this rush job. I need to do this 3-minute commercial. Can you do it like basically now in the next 3 hours? And I said, no problem. Can you send it over? And then they sent me this thing and it was 3 minutes of an actress speaking nonstop. So I watched it twice and then I wrote back and I said, I'd love to help you, but you cannot put any audio description. I couldn't, there's not even a second. And even if there was just a second, there's no point me just saying a bottle of cream or moisturizer or, and then I never heard back from them. And I was a little bit miffed because I thought I did spend time doing it. And I hope you didn't think I was being rude by saying I can't do this. But, and within that, I said, listen, the thing is, audio description is the description of the action on screen in between pieces of dialogue. So certainly I cannot go over an entire person saying, and this cream is for whatever, just for me to say, she opens the cream. I mean, it's totally redundant. So there's a lot of, kind of explaining. I mean, depending on the person's level of interest, I will go in then to give a kind of examples or talk more in depth of it's not subjective, it's objective, and you're filling in the gaps. But some people, if they're of the ilk of, oh yeah, it's for the hard of hearing or it's closed caption, I think, well, I just need to basically say this in a nutshell, and hopefully they'll see an example somewhere and understand it a bit better.
Very cool. This seems like a good time to pivot to your experience as a writer of audio description. And can you share a little bit about maybe some assumptions that you had about writing of audio description, and then you started writing an audio description, and then it's like, oh, maybe that confirms what I thought, or maybe things are a little different. Can you share some of the similarities and differences as you started to write specifically for audio description?
Absolutely, yeah, and that is such a good question. Listen, I was extremely fortunate to start in a company called ITFC that has now been bought over by, I believe, Deluxe, or assumed, or I'm not quite sure, bought. Anyway, it's now Deluxe in London. And the managing director of the audio description department had been one of the key people that started audio description in the UK. And so he very kindly trained me in audio description writing and voicing. And it took several months because actually, first of all, it's very different from other forms of writing. And even within audio description, there's a big difference between describing a nature documentary or Mickey Mouse Club, for example. Obviously, even just the words you're using, to think about a 3-year-old as opposed to a 35-year-old. So the vocabulary is different. The amount of space you have to describe is different. So I think I had no idea really about it until I started learning on this. And I was just extremely grateful, really. And it was a very great opportunity I had to have not only James O'Hara, who's the person that trained me, but also other describers who had been much more experienced than me, help me out and give me feedback after reading scripts. And that took a long time to get, because even when you think about like a soap opera compared to CSI Vegas, I did a lot of those when I started. And so long running shows that you obviously need to be consistent with what you're calling the office or the lab, or, so there's consistencies you have to work out with other people who've described it. So there was initially quite a big learning curve. And then moving to America was another learning curve in description, because there are differences with British and American describing. Certain quite big ones to do with character, whether or not, like in Britain, it was more acceptable for me to say a dark-haired man, James, crosses the room, even if he hadn't been yet introduced as James to everyone else. Whereas in America, the tendency has been don't introduce the name of the character until everyone knows the name, until somebody says, oh, James, can you pick up my Coke? Up until that point, you might just consistently be having to say the brown-haired man. And so things like that were, and then again, I had a great opportunity in America, again, with this woman, Deborah Lewis, who I met in Los Angeles, and then somebody else, Bill Patterson, who explained to me the differences working in America. So I was very fortunate to have generous people point out these differences.
Wow, what a great answer. And it's funny that I'm so biased because I'm in America. I get that. But it's one of the things that I find useful in that. And I'm curious if we could dive into this just for like a minute or two when it comes to that pre-describing a character name. Now, obviously sometimes it has to happen, but it seems that that approach in America is based on if the sighted audiences don't know the character's name, then let's have a experience in parody for the blind audiences. In other words, that if the sighted people don't know, then blind people should have that same experience. And
Mhm.
but I also get the UK approach where it's like, here's this a sighted person has the visual content of this being, and it just happens to be an audio description. Let's label him James or whatever.
Yeah,
I,
yeah.
I don't want to get too, because you and I could both talk about this for 6 hours, but like,
Yeah.
what do you feel about that? Do you have an opinion, or do you want to keep that to yourself?
Oh, that's very kind. I was thinking, well, I'm gonna have to say, I mean, listen, personally, honestly, I think it depends on the show or the movie, because if there are lots of brown-haired people, it can become quite cumbersome. And also, if you are describing something where you don't have too much time to describe, so you really do have to be quite concise, then to say James as opposed to the brown-haired bearded man every time, I think makes sense to say James, because otherwise you're losing a lot of other potential description because you're having to constantly say like 5 words instead of 1. But I think I agree with that in principle. And I think if you can make that work to not say the name of the character until it appears, then that would be the way to go. But I think on a case by case basis, is that a diplomatic answer?
It's beautiful. And it's so funny because the way you answered that, it seems to support a lot of the nuance in audio description, that here I am approaching you with this, okay, it's either one or the other. It's all or nothing. This all or nothing kind of thinking is so easy because it's so overwhelming. There's so much nuance to it. And I think your answer really encaptures the challenges as a writer. And with that, I think it's, let's go back to what you said earlier when you got the feedback with that focus group. You got involvement of blind audiences to get feedback. And I'm curious how maybe, especially recently, in the audio description was created by blind people for blind people. Are you noticing that blind people are included in the process, whether it's feedback or voicing or quality control or even engineering and editing and writing?
I can't speak to any big companies in terms of what they're doing. I don't know. I know that, for example, when I met with Disney in Los Angeles several years ago now, they were really clued up. They absolutely knew what audio description was. They knew the differences between America and Britain. They'd run their own focus groups. They had very strong opinions on things. And they've consistently, still today, very involved with the process of creating the scripts, and which I think is great, because I think the one thing that you don't want to have happen when an industry is expanding at this pace that it's going, that people lose that level of quality. And I think to have people that really care about it is crucial. And so I'm really glad, for example, that Disney are, and also I think Netflix. I really do believe that Netflix have such a vast array of their content is described, and they have guidelines that are consistently updated. And I have talked to them. I've gone in and talked to them about my experience with working with focus groups. In my experience, they've been very open to hearing things and feedback, which is just brilliant, because obviously you do not want to go off on a tangent and forget who you are creating this for. That would be a terrible disservice and a terrible tragedy after having waited so many years to have this level of description. I may misspeak right now, Roy, but I think, did you start up a Facebook group about audio describers? Because I've just joined that and I'm finding that really great. I don't know why I didn't notice that before, but that's been amazing over the last 10 days to read what people are saying.
That Facebook group, Audio Description Discussion, was started about a little over a year ago. My dear friend who's passed away, Kevin Thompson, we shared multiple conversations all the time about what audio description was. And he really guided my approach as a voice talent and how I performed the voice so that it could be more immersive. The background, as you know, as a voice talent, as an actor, you bring intention. And with audio description, it's a high wire act in the sense that it's a very subtle performance. But it's still a performance. And if you do it in a way that's not going to work, it's going to take the audience out. And so he was my focus group, and I was, helping him with some stuff that was happening on my side. And so we really had this great collaboration, and that Facebook group ended up being such a great lively conversation of all kinds, whether it's the audiences or the creators of audio description or writers or voice talents like ourselves. And maybe this is a good time to talk to you about the other aspect of your contribution to audio description, the voice side, and how that, I got to start over here for just a second, Mhairi, because I'm asking you, so what do you think about this? And what would you do? It's like, you're such an expert, and I am treating you as such. And it's like, Mhairi knows everything. What would you do about this? I hope I'm not putting you on the spot with these questions.
No, it's just the opposite. I feel very honored. I feel I hadn't realized that I knew as much as I knew. So I appreciate it. No, I'll listen to this when I'm having a bad day and go, oh yeah, no, it's true. I do know what I'm saying on occasion.
I have an email collection of folders, a folder of emails that's called Yay! Exclamation point, and it's all those happy emails that I need to reference during those rainy days.
Brilliant. What a great idea.
It's easy to lose. It's easy to lose that perspective,
Yes.
So let's talk about voicing audio description. If you could share something about that aspect that maybe you haven't shared in this interview yet, what would be the one thing that you'd love people to know about what you do when you're in front of a mic doing audio description?
Well, thank you. I mean, the narration, a bit like the writing, I was very grateful for being trained in it. And I remember my first ever narration of a script. It was for the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and every single description I got a note on. So, I remember the woman who was giving me the notes. I think she looked quite pale. I mean, by the end of it, I was pretty pale too. I thought, I'm never going to manage this, because it was just unlike anything I had done before. And I think, like what you say, you said it really eloquently. It's like walking a high wire act of giving enough inflection, being aware of the tone of the scene. I mean, initially when I started, I did a lot of soap operas. So, within those, there are quite a lot of teary scenes and breakups and things. So obviously toning your voice to that is different from, I've done years of MasterChef and MasterChef Junior, and that's a very different energy, obviously, and timing with that. So I think it helps if you're an actor, because I think you're, hopefully attuned to the tone of each scene and each piece, you know what I mean? Because things are different. I think you really do need to be a trained voice person, because I think it's certainly for some shows, like MasterChef, for example, these reality shows, you don't have too much time to describe, so you have to be pretty fast but still be coherent. Obviously, you still need to be good at diction to be able to say what you're saying. So I think there's a certain amount of technical, using your diaphragm and things like that come into play, as well as getting the tone right. But it is tricky. I mean, there are shows, though, like having done a lot of Gordon Ramsay shows for years, then you sort of get into a groove of, what it's like, but shifting that out. I mean, I guess what I would say with the voice is very similar to the writing. When you're selecting certain words for writing, I want to use the right word that will enhance and explain, and not be too technical or too, I guess, detailed. For example, I'm thinking of a show I did called Away, which is a big space show for Netflix. And I looked at a lot of the NASA websites, because I needed to know what kind of glove that was, if it was a specific glove or a specific piece of metal that people might know. And I think vocally and with words, I want to create something that enhances somebody's experience but doesn't take them out of it. I don't want it to be jarring. I don't want it to be a word that somebody says, oh, now what's an array? Hang on, have I heard that before? And then they've lost their self. And so it's the same vocally. I want to, a bit like a good waitress, somebody that is there with your glass of water before you think about it. You're not thinking, oh, I'm really thirsty. It's just there. And I hope with audio description, it's that too, that it just basically supports the experience, but doesn't dominate it.
Okay, just on a quick note. So would you consider yourself the restaurant server of audio description? I'm sorry. Okay. So
possibly.
So it's great. I've never heard it before, but it's so great. But what you're talking about too, which is so wonderful, is this intersection that you have as both a writer of audio description and also a voice talent, that those two things feed each other in a way that I don't have the advantage of. I'm given a script that's already been prepared and everything. And so I'm only doing the voice side of it. And then I know writers who also don't do the voice side, but you're able to take both of those completely separate skills and meld them and feed each other in a way that kind of elevates the story that's being told. It sounds like that when you do writing and voicing, that you're more of an auteur than a watered down, oh, I do both. It's like those are two substantial differences.
Well, thank you, Roy. I mean, it does take me a very long time to write a script, especially if it's a show, for example, like Away, because I do write a first draft, a second draft, sometimes 4 or 5 drafts, where I let something really percolate. And sometimes I test it out on friends, or I'll just text people, say, do you know what I mean if I say skull cap? What comes to mind when I say that word? Do you know what I mean? It's just, are these vocabulary words in general, does everyone have the same idea of these words? You know what I mean? Because sometimes I think I know what it, or I'm clear on it, but it might not be a common word. And I think it takes me a long time to sort of allow these things to settle, and it'll be 2 days later out for a walk and I'll think, hang on, that word, it's just not going to be, it could be misinterpreted. That happened to me a few weeks ago with a dance move. I had called a move something which is correct in Pilates, and it's the opposite in yoga. And I happened to be doing a yoga class after I had sent in the script, and I thought, oh no, I called it the opposite thing. So it hadn't been recorded yet, fortunately, but I wrote in and said, please, I need to change that because it's got 2 different meanings. So I'm quite fastidious. I'm almost maniacal, probably. I don't want to get it wrong. I don't want to misinterpret.
Very good. Well, I think this is the next transition that's going to bring in the mime. Are you ready? I think I found the question.
Right.
Okay, here we go. Let's see if this works. So what I'm hearing is in both your writing and the voicing of audio description, you're bringing those skills and those crafts so that you can bring the best performance that doesn't spotlight your work, but spotlights the work of the story, the content that's already there, the creative vision of what's being told visually is being brought to life in a way that doesn't distract the audience. Is that, so far, are we tracking? Is that
That's
fair?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Especially with feature films, because then I can feel like, oh, I can see why this is a motif, or this keeps happening, so let's bring this in.
So based on that, this is where I think the mime comes in, because I know I've seen some great mimes, and I've seen some mimes that maybe should have stayed in their room and not been in public.
Right.
Do you see where I'm going here? Do you think we have something?
I think so. I mean, what it's making me think is remembering being in Paris and studying mime, where we would have to do like 400 or 500 movements in a mime. Do you know what I mean? To like make a cocktail, for example, as like 480, and we would have to do them all numbered out. I mean, in our head, and the teacher would say, speed up numbers 80 to 100. And they said consistently, we are teaching you mime, not so that everyone will go out and do mime, because probably almost none of you will. But it's to have that discipline and that way of breaking things down and the precision in each beat. And so, on being on set or on theatre or anything like that, it's a very good skill to have. And so that is amazing. You were the first person that's ever drawn a link between that and what I do as a describer. But maybe that is a transferable skill from mime into voiceover.
Who would think? That
Nobody apart from you. Well done.
Do you think so? The question is, do you think that mime is more like audio description than closed captioning? Go. No, I'm kidding.
Well, I have to say yes, because I've never done closed captioning. I don't know what skill set you would need there. Yeah, but you're essentially painting pictures. No, I best not. Give a speech on the similarities between mine. I'll probably fall short. Best to keep that a bumper sticker soundbite. That will, I'm sure, lend more gravitas to my intelligence.
I think that tie-in is really fair. And for you to say that for pouring a cocktail, there's 480 specific moves that can be sped up and they're very precise, that those can happen from the audience's perspective as I watch you perform mime, if I were to ever watch it. And hopefully it would have audio description if I saw the video. Anyway, watching that, being able to understand how specific and how practiced that was. I'm sure that wasn't just like, oh, let's throw this together in a few minutes and then it'll be done. That your implication of saying 480 specific moves that are timed and directed and
Mm,
sped up and such
mm.
shows such a level of commitment to the work. And I think that is also a parallel to audio description, what it can be and what it is in many companies.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, I think you're right. That's a very interesting theory, and I think you could do a keynote speech on that. The comparative the comparison study between mime and, because I think you're right, and yes, certainly with the 480 move of the cocktail, nothing is fat. Everything is economic. Everything's precise. Everything is valid. Every single part is thoughtful, and there is no running away with it, which I appreciate. I think that is a skill too with audio description, is that you need to be lean and concise, vocally and writing it, really, don't you? You can't be hanging around.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, let's ask you also where you would like to see audio description headed in your dream world.
Well, I mean, I think what would be great is to have audio description as available as closed captioning. I know closed captioning has been 100% for a long time, and in Spanish too, I believe, across television. So I think to have audio description that available would be great. I think I've also described physical environments like national parks and things like that, and I think that is great to be able to take audio description into a real life place. Like I believe Disneyland too has audio description. So I think having that just continue to grow so that people can have richer experiences in places and not have to rely on somebody that they're with, that everyone can enjoy and experience, as opposed to one person, having to wait for somebody else to explain certain things. So I would like to see that continue and carry on. And I watched or listened to a keynote speech that you gave where you were talking about that you believe there should be a standard for audio description across the board, and I totally agree with that. I think it would be brilliant to have one, especially when it comes to streaming networks. So what I create for an American audience effectively on Netflix is also going to be for British and Australian, Canadian. So I think to have some kind of standard that everyone can agree on across the board, totally, so we all can just carry on, because I do believe that people are passionate about creating the best description, and nobody's, in my experience, trying to do a bad job. So I think if we can just all be on the same page and keep in mind really the end user that we're in service of, it's not about us. I think that's also a skill from being a puppeteer, actually, when you were talking about mime, because I was with a puppet company for a couple of years, and everything had to be about the puppet. It wasn't about my hands or my voice, it was the puppet. And so I think if you can remember that in certain things, certainly for audio description, that you are just constantly in service of a bigger thing, that it really is not, if it's about you, then you've done something wrong, because somebody's obviously thinking, who is doing that voice? It's driving me nuts, or
Yes.
wouldn't have said that.
And that analogy with the puppet, I think, applies. The puppet is the story in this case, that
Yeah.
you're serving the puppet when you're performing as a puppeteer, but in the service of audio description, you're serving the story. That serving the story then results in the audience having that immersive experience that goes. And
Yeah.
I love what you said about bringing up that keynote speech, the standards. And one of the things that I want to make sure that's incorporated into this conversation is that nuance that you talked about, that the difference between an adult television show and Mickey Mouse, that we're not suggesting a leveled standard where it has to be the same, that within that agreement that there is that nuance. And that's a hard hurdle for people to understand, I believe, on all aspects. I'm still understanding it, it's a super challenge. And I love that you said that these companies do care, that they're doing each their own kind of a unique approach when it comes to bringing the best audio description that they know they can.
Yeah, I do believe that is the case. And I think, like you said, it is a very nuanced, interesting discussion to have. And even, I described the White House, for example, several years ago for the tour there, and knowing how much detail to give, for example, on a wooden table. If I say 19th century wooden table, or do I say 19th century Queen Anne Regency wooden table with mahogany legs? Because somebody might be listening to that tour that may have been cited had issues with their sight, but previously they might have been an interior designer and really know what I'm talking about. So I think it's really interesting understanding and thinking about how much detail to give on a certain thing, how much is helpful and how much is just overwhelming, and people just tell me it's a wooden table, I don't need to know. So I think, yeah, language is a very interesting point to discuss in terms of description.
Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience?
Oh gosh, I should have thought about that before. And just I think, listen, I think you brought it up with saying about having a discussion and keeping, and I think you're doing a great job of that, Roy, with even starting up the Facebook group and having these interviews and making the community hopefully accessible to the people that are accessing it, so that we can continue to serve in the best way that we can. And I think let's just continue that, and let's just keep in mind that this is always a conversation and it's not about just single parts.
Yeah, and how great that there are so many different areas, so many different groups, so many individuals, so many organizations that are stepping up and amplifying that focus on what this audio description can be. It's very exciting.
Yeah.
If I could put you on the spot, Mhairi, how can people reach you, either on social media or otherwise?
Oh yeah, well, thank you. My website, which is just being redone today, which is really exciting after like 7 years of me doing the odd thing but not really being proficient in WordPress. So my website is my name, which is MhairiMorrison.com, which is MHAIRI Morrison.com. And then my Twitter is Mhairi Morrison Comedy, and my Facebook is Mhairi Steenbok. But basically everything is from my website. That has a contact email form and my social media stuff. So that is the mothership, I guess.
Very good. The mothership of all things restaurant, server, and mime.
Yes.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, Mhairi. This has been great.
Oh, thank you, Roy. It's been really fun. I did not expect to have my work as a describer compared to that of a mime, and I surprised myself with the metaphor about being a waitress for audio description. So there we go. It was an exciting conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.